All right, and we are now live. Awesome. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Career Doctors November Speaker Series, aka the Career Clinic. This is part 2 of day 1. Now, our career clinics are, again, one way for us to create equitable access to career development resources. And for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Manny Duenas. I am a career strategist and founder of Career Doctor, and I'm super stoked to be getting into this next topic with all of you, which will be how the world of remote work is changing. So, especially with the hiring season, the new hiring season coming up, you'll definitely want to tune in and see how this landscape is shifting so that you can get any advantage that you can in this hyper competitive job market. So we're going to bring on a guest speaker, go behind the scenes, and she is a talent acquisition professional from an electric car company or electric vehicle company called Rivian. Also previously has worked at Disney, as well as Lyft and now Rivian. So we're going to explore this together. So let me bring her on now, and we will have her introduce herself.
Amazing. Hey there, Manny.
Hey.
Hi there.
Welcome to the Career Clinic.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, of course. So, as I was just telling everyone, that we are going to be delving in and exploring how this landscape of remote work is changing, especially as this new hiring season is steadily approaching. How people navigate that moving forward, because everything is virtual. Yep. So I would love for you to just really quick introduce yourself. I've already kind of said a quick little blip about you, but I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you all have heard a little bit, my name is Joni, and I am about 6 years, going on 7 years worth of experience in talent acquisition. I did it right out of college. It's something that I love doing. I'm super passionate about it. And everything from full cycle to sourcing, diversity sourcing, talent acquisition recruiting is something that I'm really passionate about. As far as my experience goes, I've done it all, a little bit of everything in all different industries, all different functions. And so, as Manny mentioned, started out in an agency, moved into a corporate role at the Walt Disney Company. Super, super fortunate to have gotten that experience. Was there for about 3.5 years before landing a gig at Lyft. And going into the rideshare space, tackling a lot of really interesting work there. And then now got recruited over to go to Rivian. And so Rivian's an electric vehicle company. If you haven't heard about us now, you will probably next year. 2021 is a big year for us. All of our vehicles are going to be released. That's my little shameless plug right there. But yeah, definitely excited to be here and share a little bit more about all the things I've seen within the recruiting world, especially within the remote space.
Yes, yes, yes. So let's jump into it. My first question for you is, how have interviews changed now that they're all pretty much completely remote? I don't think anyone's going on site these days for final round interviews. How's that changing?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think a lot of companies had to adapt very early on, with COVID starting out, like in the US at least, probably March. And so a lot of companies knew that they had to shift gears here. So when it comes to interviews, we had to really think about how can we make this the best candidate experience as possible. Candidate experience is always number one. Whatever company we're going to, it's always something that's key for us. And so I would say, obviously, even initial phone screens, let's say a candidate reaches out to you. A lot of recruiters are now going to Zoom instead of having, phone calls even. That's something that's actually really big in my current space, where a lot of my colleagues are going over to Zoom even with the initial phone calls. And the reason why is because I think now more than ever, people want to feel like that they can feel connected in such a disconnected time that we're all in, with having such little people interaction. So phone calls and phone screens are going to Zoom calls now. And then that leads into virtual on-sites, So virtual on-sites is a really big thing that a lot of people are shifting to, and just using video conference more than ever, whether that be Google Hangouts or Zoom, Skype, whatever that may be. But definitely, I think, treating it like it's a real interview is really important, because, even though you're not being there in live, still dressing the part, having the eye contact, being present, being prepared, all super important still. So yeah, that's kind of how everything shifted.
Yeah, so lots to unpack there. And I think that there are a lot of changes, especially with the pandemic, full swing. It looks like we're in our second or third kind of spike here, and so looks like we're going to continue being remote to some extent here.
Mhm.
Curious, we have one visitor in the room, which is pretty cool here. Let us know where you're tuning in from, please. And so, from the next question that I wanted to field out to you is, what are some of the remote interview questions that job seekers should be preparing for or preparing to answer now, right? Because I think that there's so much more emphasis now when you're interviewing, because you should be able to maybe work from home and speak to that. So from your end, from what you're seeing as a recruiter, what kind of questions can these people expect, with these remote types of interviews?
Yeah. So a couple that just comes to mind off the bat, at a high level, I think now that we're all shifting gears to remote work, not everyone has done it before. And I think a lot of folks would like to know, how do you time manage? That's something that's so important, is time management in whatever position you're in. How do you usually juggle things that are happening all around you, whether that be your work on the computer or distractions on the side? Like, how do you time manage? So I think definitely expect some questions around that, especially since remote is such a big thing now. I think another area that I think people would, recruiters would want to dig into deeper is just, how do you work in an environment where you're not really interacting with people? Like, is that something that's going to be okay for you? Is it not going to be okay for you? Like, how do you navigate through that? So just being able to understand that better, I think, is important. But I think we're all in this together, in a sense where, recruiters understand that, even if you want to be remote or you don't want to be remote, like, we all have to be at this time in this moment. It's just like better understanding, how do you usually navigate through that?
Yes, and I think it's so important to acknowledge that this is something that's changing for a lot of people working from home. It's not something that we're used to. I remember back in like 2015-ish, I had my first remote job, right? And I was so
Yeah.
super stoked about it. And it was extremely difficult to keep up and have that discipline, to be not being able to work next to someone, right? Basically you're your own drive, and
Yep.
you need to be super proactive on your end. And so I remember that it was extremely challenging. So I can only imagine that today, how everyone is just beginning to kind of get acclimated to that environment, and maybe like they're okay with it now, but like in the beginning, I'm sure it was definitely
Yeah.
tough to cope with. And I'm sure there's still people who are just getting jobs. You
Yep.
see a lot of people obtaining jobs recently, posting about it on LinkedIn, and this is something that they need to be aware of, is that
Yeah.
there are things like Zoom fatigue,
Exactly.
things like you need to hold yourself accountable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I mean, another thing that people would want to know is, like, how do you stay motivated in general, right? Because, like, when you are remote, like, you really have to stay on top of it, and you really have to stay motivated. A lot of times, to your point, like, Zoom fatigue is such a real thing. Like, for example, today I was in like 6 back-to-back meetings for 30 minutes each, and it ended up being like what, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, just sitting in front of a computer talking out through a screen. And so just making sure you have the ability to take a break, and making sure you're carving out time is super important.
Yeah, that structure. The structure is super important, and I think
Hmm.
critical today, as we're navigating this remote landscape of working. You got
Yeah.
people coming in, behind. Walk. I was literally in a meeting with someone who was I think they were traveling. I think they're on the East Coast, and my boss was in the meeting as well, and
Hmm.
I think her husband was home. You could see him like going to the refrigerator, getting like food out. So
Yeah.
it's a lot to deal with. And I work with a lot of young adults, from underserved communities, and it's no joke. There's everyone's home, you know,
Yeah.
and sometimes there's not a lot of space to work. You know,
Hmm.
you really have to be mindful of where you're working and being as professional as you can. Especially
Absolutely.
if you're starting a job for like it's a new job or you're junior there.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too much on a tangent here, but I think that we can definitely unpack, like what does a good day look like in terms of working remote? Like, what does that day look like in terms of staying motivated? What do you do?
Hmm.
I think that's definitely something that, if we have time, we can, delve into.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
but I do want to ask you, how are companies now attracting talent now that everything is remote? Because you know, you can't go in person. They can't like show you around the building and like give you a tour, right?
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
how has that changed? How are they just like, hey, come work for us?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think companies are very cognizant and on making sure that we're staying competitive. So, to your point, how do if someone was to interview when you usually go in for an on-site, that's when you get to really feel out, if this is a place for you. And now that everyone can't do that due to COVID, companies are getting creative. And so whether that be like a virtual company tour, so that's something I think that a lot of companies are doing is like creating like a virtual tour where, it's not the same as being there in person, but like you get a very detailed tour of like going down the halls and, here's the break rooms, here are the snacks. Like this is like what it would look like, post COVID that you could be here.
The snack section.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, that's something that a lot of companies are doing now is just making sure that, they're allowing that feeling and that connectedness still without actually being there live. Um, as far as companies, how are they attracting the talent? I mean, I think it's a good thing. It's kind of a good thing because more companies are going towards the remote route, which means that there's more interest in other locations. And that's always a good thing too, because, before, let's say you're recruiting a role and they have to sit in the Bay Area. Now, a lot of companies are reassessing if the role has to be remote or not. And so if not, they are allowed to look other places like in Michigan or in like Oklahoma or Florida or whatever that may be. And, a lot of the postings now are remote. They state that they are remote and that attracts a lot more talent. So I think it's, in a sense, kind of a good thing because people that don't live in the Bay Area are getting opportunities to work for Bay Area companies.
That is so true, and actually, that's a good segue into my next question, which is, how is relocating? Like changing. Like, do you have to like? It sounds like you don't have to relocate anymore, right? You can just work from another state for a company. Like you're on the East Coast, you can work for a company on the West Coast. How does that work? Obviously there's a time difference, and you need to be
Hmm.
aware of that. But in terms of like, I don't know if you know, but like, how does like pay work? Is it different? Do you get paid the salary of a person on the West Coast for someone on the East Coast? You know,
Yeah.
the salaries definitely are different. In wherever you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, I think that's going to depend on the company in regards to the compensation piece because cost of living does come into play. Like Bay Area is going to cost very different than like Texas, and so that really does vary. And so as far as, are all roles remote now? I can't say that is true for every company, but I can say that a lot of companies are now reassessing more and looking at it more critically, like, can this role be remote? Like, I think before we went into this remote culture, it was more expected that people had to be at the home base or like at the HQ. But I think now with COVID, we're really thinking more critically, does this person have to actually sit in this location, or can they actually do their work remote? And so I think with that, like, there's a lot more flexibility with it, which is also, I think, kind of a good thing.
So on that note, I have a really great question. At least I think it's a great question,
Yeah.
because when companies are hiring talent, and let's say like a company in San Francisco is hiring, right?
Hmm.
And you are, let's say, in Arizona, right?
Yeah.
Are they like thinking like, oh, well, we would rather hire someone in the San Francisco Bay Area. They'll still be remote, but maybe like, when we're able to go back in person, it'll be good for them to be in the Bay Area. Is that like a factor here? Or is it just kind of like, we're just going to hire anyone who's remote? And, when this goes back to normal, they'll still have their job. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think again, it's about expectations and understanding the role and location. So, like, for example, like, there was a period of time I was working on a role, and I had to ask my hiring manager, like, is this a remote role, or is this only remote because of COVID? Do they have to go back into the office? Are they going to have to relocate? And for some roles, there it is critical for them to be in the office, post COVID, because of stakeholder engagements or having to build relationships with key people that sit in that office, whatever that may be. And so I always set those expectations with my candidates too. It's like, hey, I know I'm calling you and you're located in, Austin, Texas. I know that we're all remote for now. And, from what the leadership has shared with me, everyone's remote till, June 2021 until we reassess further. So as for like the rest of the 6 months here, you could be remote, but we do need someone that can relocate eventually. Is that something you're open to? So just setting those expectations and having those realistic settings is super important between even hiring managers and the candidate.
Yeah. So it sounds like, if you're, job searching, you need to be aware, and kind of, I don't know, read it, I guess, like that. Once things, if hopefully they go back to normal in terms of
Yeah.
we're able to go back in person, that, if it's like, that's maybe the reason why it's a contract. If it's a contract, it might be because, they are just, this is temporary until things go back to being in person. So I guess it's some food for thought and something to think about if you're a job seeker, and something that you
Yeah.
weigh out and decide on your own. And maybe even just straight up asking the recruiter or
Yeah.
your point of contact at that company, like,
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's always recommended.
like forever.
Yeah, no, it's always recommended. If you're like a candidate, and you want to better understand it, ask the recruiter or the hiring manager, whoever you're talking to. They have to have that information to let you know, because, if you can't move even post COVID, then it might not be the best fit, right? So don't ever be afraid to ask straight up, and it's logistical items that you have to make sure it covers for you too. So
Absolutely. So
yeah.
are there any processes that are changing for new hires now that we're in this kind of remote virtual world? Um, Anything shifting in that process?
Yeah. Well, when you say process, what do you mean by that?
Let's just say onboarding.
Yeah. Yep, that's a good one. So onboarding, definitely, I would say most companies has shifted to, or they have to. I think a lot of companies are still navigating how to perfect it, but definitely have gotten at least the basics down of what, how to bring in a new hire. I just started a new company about 2.5 weeks ago, and so this is my first time doing the virtual onboarding, and so I didn't know what to expect necessarily. um, and so I thought it was good. I think it was good that, we got a rundown of, some of the higher ups, some of the leadership, to be able to speak to all of us. I think they tried their best to get the same level of excitement than maybe it would be in person. It's hard to because it's all virtual. But yeah, it's a work in progress, and all I can say is definitely come into virtual onboards with some grace because everyone's figuring it out. Companies have never done this before either, so if there's like a level of expectations of having it to be a certain way, you can throw that out the window because, again, everyone's kind of on the same page. So again, I definitely think that the onboarding process is something that we all had to adjust to, like whether that be a candidate, from a candidate's perspective, new hire, or a company. We're all in this together.
Well said. Especially the grace part, please, give some grace, when it comes to like the onboarding. A lot of this is new for everyone.
Yeah.
We're all adapting and we're all, getting acclimated to, whether it's onboarding, the interview process. The interview process. I think that while we're on that topic, and again, I don't want to go too much on a tangent, but I gotta ask, if you're open and comfortable sharing, are you able to summarize what your experience was like, being reached out to by Rivian, going through the interview process and all being remote, accepting it, onboarding, what does that look like in summary?
Yeah, no. I think that's a great question because I didn't know how it was going to go either. But, as I mentioned, a lot of companies have shifted even the initial interactions to Zoom calls. So, I was used to having my initial phone calls or virtual, my initial calls be just over the phone. But my first interaction with anyone there was over the Zoom. I did it a couple of other times with like a couple of managers and whatnot. And so my process honestly was really smooth. I thought they did a great job in making sure I felt connected with the company. I think that was the biggest thing. And I think most companies know that, building that connection is what's so important to get any candidate excited and interested. And so, whether that be from the Zoom call to the virtual on-sites, meeting with multiple people on a panel throughout the day, to, actually getting an offer, and then now the virtual onboarding. Definitely, I feel like they did a great job. So I can't say anything else, just because it's been such a great time. I think, again, I always look at everything from a perspective of, like I don't have super high expectations only because it's COVID and like no one knows how to navigate through this. But I think they did a great job in providing all the things that I needed to set me up for success. So.
And I think that you're coming from a very unique standpoint because you are coming from like the recruiting realm, right? So you kind of understand that, we're all just figuring it out, on their end. You may, understand a little bit better, what they're going through and, what they're kind of juggling as well.
Yeah. And I think something that I would like to add a note to is, feedback is important too. So like, for example, if the onboarding process, you were hoping to see a little bit more of this, or you were expecting a little bit more structure, or, whatever that may be, like, don't be afraid to share that with, the proper person on the team or whoever that might be, because again, we're all figuring it out. And in order for them to improve, they need feedback. So that's something that I think I would encourage folks to not be afraid of is feedback is always good. Obviously be able to deliver it in a way that is fruitful and beneficial, but don't be afraid to share your thoughts too if you think there's a way that we can make better for whatever process that might be.
Wow, that is a great addition. I didn't think about that, like, and because I think a lot of people are uncomfortable, with providing feedback, especially upwards feedback when you feel like you're not in a position of power, like offering feedback to your manager or offering feedback, to someone who's going to hire you, may put you in a position where you feel like, you can't do that. But I think it's great to hear that, that feedback is, maybe welcome. I think definitely read the room, when you want to offer feedback for sure. While we're on the note, like when do you think would be like the best time to offer, a recruiter or someone who's interviewing you feedback if that's
Yeah. So like, for example, let's say you go through your onboarding, your virtual onboard, and you notice like, oh, I think I would have loved to hear a little bit more about this, or I wish there was more of that. I think after you go through it, and perhaps, learning who put the onboarding together, which most likely is, the learning and development team or someone on HR, just being able to share it. Of course it's, feedback is always hard to receive sometimes or to give, but just being able to articulate it in a way that is, beneficial. I think coming from a place of goodness is always good. So again, it's about the delivery of how to do it, but I think most of the times it's well received because I think companies and people always want to do better. So
absolutely. And if you are curious about, learning how to get more feedback from, your interviews, who are you supposed to ask? Is our interviews the only way to get feedback? And I'm talking about like getting feedback from the recruiter, so it's the opposite of, providing them feedback. We did a discussion earlier today with a technical recruiter from Google on all things regarding feedback. So, when that is actually in the shop right now and will be on our YouTube channel probably by tomorrow. So
awesome.
that being said, I want to move on here and get into the pros and cons of working remotely now, right? Because
Yeah.
you're like, there are a lot of pros and there are a lot of cons. I mean,
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things are commuting, right? Like, gosh, I don't have to commute. I'm in Livermore, right? And I was commuting to Menlo Park.
Wow.
That was
That's a trek.
not fun.
Yeah.
Not fun. So yeah, pros and cons from your end.
Yeah. So I'm going to be speaking on the perspective of being remote even pre-COVID. Before, because I was a remote person for I think the past like 2 years now. So yeah, it's been interesting. And honestly, I thought it was going to be difficult for me because I'm such an extrovert. I love people. I love being around people. I'm one of those people that, goes to someone's desk and like, hey, what you doing? How was your weekend? Make that small talk. So I thought it was going to be difficult for me. I think the biggest thing is, from a pros standpoint, I ended up really liking remote work because I value flexibility like a lot, whether that means, being able to do laundry when I have 5 minutes free from a break of, meetings, or, picking up some salad down the street at Trader Joe's. Like, I like to be able to do that, the convenience factor also is really important too for me personally. And, you touched on is the not having to drive anywhere, right? You're just literally coming out of bed and turning on your computer and you're starting your day. And so I think that's pretty awesome too. And also personally, I felt more productive being remote. And I think that's a debate for many, because I think some might argue that really, are you really more productive? Personally, for me, and I think it does depend on personality and how you work, but when I was in an office, I was very distracted, with coworkers, and I'm a people person. I chat a lot. I hop around people's desks. I'm, talking to people. But now that I'm remote, I feel like I'm working a lot more because I don't have any distractions around me. I don't have anyone to talk to, right? It sounds kind of sad, but at the same time, it makes me a lot more productive. So going on, sorry?
I was just saying conversely, like the opposite of that, of being able to, go to someone's desk and, kind of tap on their shoulder, is not being able to like ask for support, exactly when you need it, right? You have to schedule a meeting, right? You have to schedule a meeting maybe
So
they're
that's
not
the
available.
cons. Exactly. So I would say that's a really great con. It's the collaboration piece is not as easy. The ability to just walk over and ask a question is not as easy. On the flip side of being more productive, you might end up overworking because the lines between being at home and working remotely kind of blur. And so you end up working like more hours. And so those are kind of the things, which is why it's so important to put structure around your days. whether that means to schedule time to take a 10-minute walk around the block or block off a time to have your lunch. I've talked to a lot of coworkers and I found that most of them forget to even eat throughout the day now because they're just on the computer.
Yeah.
And so, it's like, hey, you got to find time to make sure you do that because, it's very easy to just plop in front of your computer for 5 hours. And before you know it, it's the end of the day and you haven't eaten anything. So just being very intentional and thoughtful around your day and planning it out in advance is important when you're remote working.
Right. And I think, I hate to just stack on the cons here, but I think we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, and that is, being at home, sometimes there's a lot of back things going on in the background that are distracting. And sometimes the people that are around you at home may not understand, they're like, hey, I'm working, or hey, I'm in class right now.
Yeah.
There's just a lot that you have to juggle as well and be mindful of in communicating that, yeah, I got this going on, and that everyone knows. Because normally you're at work, in person, whoever's at home or whoever that you're living with knows you're at work. Right?
Yeah.
That's not the case all the time when you're in person or when you're working remote.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I like that you're taking the pros stance here. Do you have more pros for us?
I mean, yeah, you can foster a dog and you can hang around a dog while you're at work. I mean, I know some dogs, some companies, they allow dogs, but not all do. But now that everyone's remote, you can hang out with a dog. And that's something I did, actually. I took advantage of that. I fostered a dog for a week and a half because I wanted a buddy, just because remote life can get so lonely. And so it brought me a lot of joy. So
cool.
That's something I think it's pretty awesome. Yeah, I don't know. It's just all about adapting again. You have to be able to adapt in order to survive and moving forward and be successful in your job. And I feel like if you're able to adapt to the remote life and be able to time manage and prioritize and stay motivated, remote life is pretty nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And, coming from a recruiter standpoint, what's it like, being a recruiter on the other end, and, interviewing people for remote positions? What's that experience like, seeing that shift in the job market?
Yeah. I feel like if anything, it's still pretty solid. There's a lot of people looking for work. Unfortunately, the layoffs happened for a lot of people and in a lot of companies and industries. So a lot of people are looking to get back into work. And so I think, again, the remote piece and having everyone be remote is such a big thing. It's giving people more opportunities in different areas and locations. But at the same time, I know it's so difficult because, not everyone likes the remote piece. And so from a job market standpoint, I feel like the candidate flow is still there. I'm still getting candidate applicants. I'm getting a lot of hits still. And I think it's a good thing because people are looking for jobs. The layoffs have impacted so many people during the COVID situation, unfortunately. But that's why I'm here, and if anyone needs jobs, shameless plug, reach out to me.
Rivian, plug for Rivian. That's such a cool company, by the way.
Yeah.
Venture truck and SUV electric.
Yep. Yeah. And a lot of people forget about the partnerships piece of it, which is, we have a partnership with Amazon, building out over 100,000 electric vehicles. And, the plan for that is to help with the carbon footprint, to lessen that, right? Because when you think about how many trucks are around delivering packages left and right, it's really bad for the environment. So being able to tap into the fleets industry and deliveries and whatnot, that's so important to tap into too.
Pretty smart.
Yeah. I mean, with Gavin Newsom, he said it himself, right? By 2035, he wants all vehicles sold in California to be electric. So this is the future,
Electric cars and vehicles in the future. Love it. Can't wait to get mine. So curious, about maybe companies that are offering more remote work than, no, not remote work, but because I know there's a few companies that are kind of like entirely remote or will be indefinitely remote. And I know that
Mm-hmm.
one of them is Twitter, where,
Yep.
well, it's optional. Like you can work from home indefinitely, or you can come into the office when things, get better.
Yeah.
Pandemic. I know that Facebook is remote until July, I think July 2021. And
Yeah.
the organization I'm with is also kind of, is, well, the site that I'm at kind of runs congruently with that.
Mm-hmm.
We're partnered with Facebook. So I know that we're going to be remote for quite some time. Do you know of like any companies that are going to be doing the same, like going to be indefinitely remote or for?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the tech companies, I mean, I'm not going to say all of them, but I think Microsoft was another one that I've read about recently, actually. So, yeah, I mean, again, more and more companies are having to stay competitive because they understand
Mhm.
that other companies are doing this, and if they want good talent, they need to kind of shift gears and reassess and rethink things to be able to still attract good talent, you know? So I think more and more companies are really, really reflecting on, which roles can we really be remote and which ones do we have to have in the office, because, we got to think about how to continuously gain solid talent that are, going over to Microsoft or going over to Square or going over to Twitter, that are all remote. So that's definitely something that I think more companies are being more thoughtful around. But again, there's companies that just they can't. They have to have people in the HQ or in the offices for whatever reason, and so it's just that balance. But yeah, it's something that I think a lot of companies are being a lot more intentional and thoughtful about.
Yeah, I know that this was something that was going to like kick in, a few years from now, that, most jobs were going to be, remote. It was going to be kind of like the new way that people were working, in the
Hmm.
workforce. It was like, I can't remember if it was like 60% or like 90%, but it's happening sooner than expected because of, what's happening right now.
Hmm.
So I guess Twitter, Microsoft, if you're looking to work indefinitely remote, those are some interesting companies to take a look at, because I know that, some
Hmm.
people prefer to work remote. So,
Yeah.
and if that's the case, maybe like you said, tech companies are kind of where it's at for working remote. So something to explore a little bit more. Um, so my last question for you tonight is, what what tips would you offer someone who is new to working remote? I think we kind of touched on it a little bit. We're about to get into it, and it was going to be a tangent, but I didn't want to get ahead of ourselves in the beginning. Well, what are some tips that someone new to working remote can use to be successful, in a new job? Because it's they got to adapt.
Yeah. 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 No, great question. I would say to really utilize your calendar, whether that be on Google or Outlook or whatever that might be, but definitely utilize it. And don't be afraid to block time off for yourself. I think that's something that's super key, is to be intentional with how you spend your time. So my calendars are always are pretty full, but that's because I block off certain things for myself. And I think a lot of people forget to do that again, and they end up sitting in their chair for 5 hours, and then before they know it, they didn't drink water for like that amount of time. So I actually do have blocks for 5-minute break, drink your water, or take your lunch, make sure you eat your food, or take a 10-minute walk around the block. Um, so I think that's going to be really helpful because it sets a lot more structure to your days and your life in a remote setting. And you have to be able to do that, because if you don't, you kind of let everything else run its course and you just kind of forget about yourself. And that's not good for yourself, because you'll get burnt out. And then when you get burnt out, you're not going to be as productive, at work. And so definitely, it sounds like no brainer type things, but you'd be surprised how many people don't do those things because they just figured like, oh, I'll take my break, or like, oh, I'll do this, but then they forget because they're just so like focused on their computer and their laptops. Again, it's so blurring to just, you're at home, so you're like in this environment where you're like, okay, this is my safe, this is my area where I can relax. But then like everyone's at work now, yeah, their safe zone. And so, it's kind of a mixed signal type thing. And so just making sure that you're intentional about doing that is super important.
Yes. I also think that practicing mindfulness is so important these days, and
Mm-hmm.
practicing your breathing, or if you're able to, go for a walk, get some sun. I know that like I live like right by a park. It's literally
Yeah.
like 1 minute away walking. And so maybe like a couple times a week I will, take my dog and go for a walk, during like lunch, just to
Yeah,
get the air, because cabin fever is real, and like Zoom fatigue is real,
it
and
is.
like I feel like a lot of people are not kind of built to be kind of on camera, and behind a screen all day long. It's not
Yeah.
not what we signed up for, you know.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. And
important to practice
I
those
love
things.
what you said about being mindful too. Like, download Headspace or download an app that gives you time to like meditate for like a minute or two. I know it sounds kind of, you know, feng shui or whatever, or hippy dippy, but like it's so important to make sure you're being intentional about your mental health just as much as your physical health. So
Yeah.
great tip.
Take breaks, people. Like really, take breaks when you can. Go do something else. Get away from like your laptop, your computer. Go play with your pet
Hmm.
if you need to. Get some fresh air. It's super
Yeah.
important. Something that I've been learning, because we've been remote for like a year now at Year Up, you know,
Yeah.
and we're teaching students on Zoom, every day, and you really need to like step away, from time to time to just
Yeah.
change of scenery. So
Absolutely.
I definitely think that practicing that mindfulness is super important when it comes to how you can be successful in working a new job remote. I think that also one of the things you said, it sounds like adding that structure to your calendar, blocking off things so that I guess, is that like for like the reminders?
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I color coordinate my calendars, and so like I have a color that's dedicated for just me, and I know that that's a me time. So again, I know it sounds like a no-brainers, but you just got to do it, and you just got to be more thoughtful around it, because if you don't, then you're just going to live a life that's like, you know, sleep, eat, work, and you don't want to do just that. You want to do so much more.
Absolutely. I think the last thing that I'll add is that to really just, give yourself some grace. You're adapting, you're kind of just figuring out if this is like your first remote job, you're figuring it out and like how to adapt to that.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of new right there. And sometimes there's a learning curve. Well, in fact, I would argue that every time you start a new job, there's a learning curve to some extent.
Yeah.
So really give yourself some grace. I think it's important though to know like, when you really need to kind of like, you know, adapt, like really like, okay, I got it now. Right?
Yeah.
Because you can't, be like, staying in one place and not growing forever, and giving yourself grace to the extent like, oh, I'm so new to this, I can just stay in one place. It's
Hmm.
important to know that you got to move forward and you got to adapt to the job. And I think that like getting that feedback from the people around you and the people that you work with, is something that you can utilize to, continue to grow, right? Ask, like
Yeah.
what are the expectations of working with?
Yeah.
Ask
No.
the team.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions. I think a lot of people feel afraid to ask questions in general. I feel like I do the opposite. I ask too many questions, but it's good to be able to learn from other people and sharing tips and knowledge of how to best live and adapt to this life is so important. And just remembering you're not alone. I think that's the biggest thing. It's like whatever you're feeling, whatever you're going through, you're not the only person. There has to be other people that are feeling this way. So don't be afraid to just reach out and ask folks for help or if you need anything. Yeah.
Exactly. We are at 45 minutes, and so I do want to pivot and see that I'm not sure if that person, the person who is viewing right now, is actually still there. So we're actually going to transition into Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can type that out and ask us. And if you can use this format, that this is your question. Well, since you're potentially the only person here, we're going to know it's your question. So if you have any questions for us, please, let us know, and we'll do our best to answer them for the next 15 minutes, depending on how many questions there are. So if you do have any questions, put them there. I think we'll wait for a little bit. If not, then we will conclude here for the evening. And I am very comfortable with silence.
Great. Do you know how long that person was in there for? Or do you see if they leave or not?
I'm not sure how long they've been in. There were two people at one point.
Oh, really? Wow. That's cool.
But yeah, I'm not it doesn't say how long they've been in. I'm sure that when I delve into the I think the analytics on YouTube and go into the studio, I might be able to figure that out. But
cool.
It sounds like we are good to go. Sounds like we're off the hook.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing me on here and just sharing this and helping me, just letting me use your platform to be able to share my thoughts and whatnot. And so if anyone else has questions, don't be afraid to reach out to me, ask me. I'm always all ears and I'm always willing to help. I love to help. And so thanks again so much, Manny. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'm going to end the broadcast, but if you can stick around for just a minute.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Actually, we'll see you tomorrow.